Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you who are attending this online training today. This series of training will allow us to take our basic approaches to data collection and take it to the next level through a lens of program alignment, evidence of effectiveness, and data quality and use. We intend to make sure that all the supervisors attend each and every one of these trainings. I'd like to ask that each supervisor who watches the training to enter your name and organization on the attendance link located on the slide deck. Welcome to the module Program Alignment. In this module, we will describe how to clarify the cause and effect relationship at the heart of your program. This training is designed to deepen your understanding of how to create alignment by using concepts from your theory of change and your program logic model. By the end of this webinar, you should understand the definition and importance of program alignment, how to accurately identify and quantify the scope and nature of the community problem you are tackling, how to make sure your resources, objectives, and services are aligned to address the need or problem you have defined, increase your understanding of program performance through a review of outputs and outcomes, what theories of change and logic models are, and how they can help you ensure that all the aspects of your program align to effectively address the need or problem you have defined. Program alignment means you've effectively identified community needs and ensured that all of the aspects of your program align to directly address those needs. Program alignment is important to ensure a strong relationship between the following elements: community problem or need. What's wrong in the community that needs fixing? Resources. What resources can your organization deploy to address the problem? What staff and other resources are available to implement your planned services? Intervention. How do you plan to fix things? Assessment. How will you know if you've achieved your objectives? Assessment of outputs. How will you track or monitor how much service you've provided, such as how many people you've served? Assessment of outcomes. How will you know you have achieved what you intended? Performance measure results. Based on your assessment, what do you know actually occurred? For your output results, you should know how many people you reached, trained, tutored, referred, etc. Outcome measures should indicate whether or not a measurable change occurred. Did the anticipated number of people increase their knowledge? Next, we'll return to each section for a deeper look. Identifying the community problem or need. The first step of alignment is to identify the community problem by looking at what is happening right now in that community. In those communities, it's important to look at the current situation and see what you want to improve. If we say we want to improve something, and then we look at what needs to improve within that community, there is generally a gap. Our work is about closing that gap. The existence of our program presumes a gap. In our community, there is a gap between what we say we want and what we have. For example, we want all of our children to be ready for academic success. We want all of our waterways to be clean. We want our seniors to have safe, healthy, affordable housing. At times, it can seem that this list is endless. Our work is about working on that gap, narrowing the distance between what we want and what is actually happening today on the ground. No one agency or program can eliminate the change gap, but we certainly can contribute to narrowing it. As we begin to look at that gap, it is important to collect quantitative data that helps us define the nature or scope of the problem. How many or what percentage of the population is affected? It's also important to look at the context, such as defined location, rural versus urban. Over what period? You should use quantitative data that is as recent as possible, gathered from a reliable source, and relevant to the specific community or location members will serve. When looking at the nature of the gap, does the problem affect individuals, families, a particular community? Consider who or what percentage of the population is affected. It's also important to look at the context, such as defined location, rural versus urban, or over what period of time. When looking at the scope, consider how severe, long-standing, or pervasive is the problem. How many individuals or families are directly affected by the problem, either in absolute terms or as a percentage of the entire community. Explore the causes of the problem, why the problem exists, and how it came about, such as historical data showing how the problem started and how long it's been around. Knowing the cause of the problem can help you define your solution and inform your choice of services activity. Don't just rely on a gut feeling about what's going on, and don't define the problem simply as the lack of services you are providing. Need. Get specific. Problem and need. The problem is the negative condition that exists in the service area proposed, while the need explains the scope, significance, and cause of the problem. The problem need statement answers questions such as who's affected, how many, how severe. It also answers the question, so what? What will likely happen if nothing is done? And finally, why does the problem exist and how is it perpetuated? General statement of need. Too many children in the region read below grade level. In order to move to a more specific problem or need statement, gather statistics on the number of elementary school students at a specific school in a specific district or in a specific neighborhood who read below grade level. The data should be collected from schools, state education office, OSPI, or other community-based organizations. The problem need statement should also reflect statistics and data sources that are reputable, current, and local. The best data come from reputable primary sources such as government agencies, institutes, foundations, and universities that have conducted their own research and are as current or up-to-date as possible and are locally relevant. News reports are not primary sources. Data from multiple reputable sources increase reliability. For example, the community problem is the third graders at Riverton Elementary are not reading at grade level as demonstrated by a high failure rate on the state reading exam. This is supported by data documenting the failure rates of Riverton students on the state exam and research on the importance of mastering reading by the end of the third grade for future academic success. Number 3, providing services and utilizing resources to address a community need. Once you've quantified the nature and scope of the problem, you need to determine or identify the resources you have available to address the problem. What are the resources you plan to tap into to address the problem you've identified? What staff will you have, including, but not limited to, requested or awarded AmeriCorps members? Are there other staff or community-based organizations that will also help you address the problem? Do you anticipate having many community volunteers to support the AmeriCorps members in their service? What materials are available or will you purchase, such as curricula or instructional materials? What equipment or supplies are available, such as technology, computers? What professional development resources are available, such as training for staff? What community resources can you partner with or refer participants to? Your planned services. Planned services are all about what you intend to do because you believe it will contribute to the change you want to see. Structured activities or our planned intervention are designed to solve the problem and produce the intended outcome. The intervention can be referred to on the action link between the change you seek and what actually happens. It's what we do because we believe it's going to create the change we want to see. Design, select, or review your planned services. Whether you're designing a new program or selecting services, you should take the time to ensure your planned services are ones that directly address the defined needs in your problem statement, and whether or not these services are likely to help you achieve those objectives. In your service delivery design, you should ask the 2 following questions. How do you know your proposed services will be effective in addressing the problem? And how do you know your services will work with your proposed target population? The best way is to review research studies, both of your own program, if you have them, or studies of similar programs. If you are planning to implement a new program based on the service model that has been used elsewhere, make sure the research is applicable to your target population. Make sure the dosage, frequency, intensity, and duration that you are proposing is similar to the one studied. If research shows an intervention was effective, but services are provided every day for a year, and you're proposing just twice a week for 2 months, you may not see the same results. If you are planning on designing a new service model, you should take even more care to ensure that the type of services you are proposing have been shown to be effective with populations that are similar to the one you are serving. If you are already implementing services, you may want to identify additional research on your own model to make sure you're getting the results you want. Define your services. When you define your services, it's important to consider how your services will look like when implemented. Who specifically will you serve? How long will you provide services? What will be the frequency, intensity, and duration of your services? That is, who will do what for whom, how often, and for how long, and for what time period. It is important to consider your program design and dosage, such as frequency, intensity, and duration. Your intervention should be well defined. In this example, the intervention will provide individualized tutoring to 30 low-income third-grade students who scored below proficiency levels on the state standardized test last spring. The tutoring will be provided by trained AmeriCorps members, occur one-on-one or in small groups of 3 to 5 students, occur twice weekly for at least 1 hour each session for 9 months, focus on 5 building blocks of literacy skills, and engage students through integrated reading, writing, and verbal communication activities. Number 4, understanding program performance. Assessment. How will you know if you've achieved your objectives? You will need to assess your progress both towards your output objectives and outcome objectives to understand what your actual performance results are. Assessments need to align logically with objectives and with interventions. If your objectives are to provide reading tutoring services to 50 low-income third graders, and as a result 75% of those served will have increased reading proficiency, your assessments must measure both how many students received tutoring services and how many of those students served actually had improved their reading skills. Assessment helps identify whether or not you've achieved your output and outcome objectives. That is, whether or not you've gotten the output and outcome results you intended. These output and outcomes are also called performance measures. Your output provides information about how much service you actually provided or how many people you actually served. Your outcome results will provide information about how much changes, improvement, or growth actually occurred as a result of your intervention. This information will become part of the performance measure reporting and can also help you make decisions about future program directions. If you didn't serve as many people as you thought you would, why is that so? What challenges or barriers did you face, and what can you do differently next time? If you didn't make the level of change you thought you would, why is that? It is very important to get specific about your outputs and outcome. A vague statement would be like, provide tutoring to students who need it. A specific statement would be, provide tutoring to 30 low-income students identified as below grade level on curriculum based on reading assessments. For your outcome objective, a vague statement would be, improve reading proficiency for students. A specific reason would be, among students served, at least 80% will meet or exceed third grade proficiency benchmarks on the reading assessment that accompanies the tutoring curriculum used. Outputs are the services you provide or products you create through your planned intervention. Outputs quantify the actual level of service you plan to deliver or products you plan to create given the resources, such as staffing, you have available. Outputs are generally an unduplicated count of the number of students you plan to tutor, the number of houses you plan to build, or the number of families who will be housed, the number of students you plan to provide job training to, the number of veterans you plan to engage in community service, or the number of acres of land you plan to restore, or the number of trees you plan to plant. Outcomes are the result of your intervention, typically a change in the situation of beneficiaries of service such as educational achievement or housing. Outcomes can reflect changes in individuals, organizations, communities, or the environment, and may include changes in attitudes, knowledge, behavior, or conditions. Your outcome data quantifies the actual level of change you anticipate in making, given the resources you have available and the amount of service you plan to provide. While some outcomes may not be achieved by all beneficiaries within a single program year, it is important to set targets that reflect what you think the program can accomplish in a single grant year. For example, if your program is designed to help students graduate successfully from high school, but the program serves students in the grades 9 through 12, your target should only reflect the number of students who would be eligible to graduate from high school within the current grant year, which is likely only to be 12th grade students. That doesn't mean you shouldn't serve the 9th through 11th grade students. It just means you will need to set your outcome target as a smaller subset of the output target and explain your rationale. You don't need to measure your long-term goals as part of your performance measure. You can measure short or medium-term goals that are attainable in a single grant year but reflect important steps towards your ultimate goals. For example, if your ultimate goal is for children to grow up to be healthy adults, you don't need to and can't measure that in a single year. Instead, you could measure the number of children that have increased their level of physical activity as a result of participating in a member-led program. This is a meaningful change in behavior that is appropriately ambitious and is a logical step towards developing healthier adults, but is also measurable in a single year. Number 5, putting it all together. Clarifying your theory of change and logic model is a critical step for existing programs, as it provides an opportunity to compare and contrast your program's approach or allows you to consider where to make changes to strengthen your program's outcomes. Revisiting your theory of change and logic models offer you the opportunity to revisit your choice of outcomes to ensure there is a logical and practical relationship between the service you provide and the change you intend to make. A theory of change helps an organization understand what it is trying to achieve. Developing a theory of change requires you to articulate assumptions underlying your choice of activities by documenting why you believe the activities will lead to change. A theory of change is a theory for how your project activities can address or solve a stated problem or need. A theory of change articulates a problem, a proposed intervention, and the change that is expected to result from delivering the intervention. Underlying the theory is a series of assumptions supported by evidence about why the intervention is likely to lead to the outcomes. The logic model serves as a visual framework that shows how all of the key components within your program are linked or aligned. The logic module is a roadmap that illustrates your theory of change, showing how your services or intervention will create the change you are looking to see. Let's walk through an example of what a theory of change and logic model looks like in everyday life. While the term theory of change may be new to you, thinking or mapping the elements of the theory of change has 3 main elements: problem, intervention, outcome. There is a community problem or need to be addressed supported by local data. There is a specific intervention or a set of activities that you have chosen to address the problem based on evidence that a similar approach has worked in the past, supported by research. Make sure your intended outcome will bring about a measurable positive change in the community in relation to your targeted need. The theory of change is a way to articulate underlying assumptions about why you are doing something, what you are doing, and why you think it will result in the changes you intend. In the example above, our theory of change says that if I have strep throat and I want to get rid of the strep as quick as possible, I take antibiotics. Then I have another strep test, which is the assessment, to determine if the antibiotics worked, and if it did, the strep is eliminated, which is our outcome result. The logic model is the roadmap that illustrates your theory of change and shows how your intervention will create the change you are looking to see. The logic model serves as a visual framework that shows how all aspects of your program are linked or aligned. When developing a logic model for your program, map the logic as it makes sense to you and your stakeholders. Logic models can vary in form and level of detail, ranging from simple to complex. There is no one or right way to develop a logic model. It often depends on your purpose, how you use the logic model, who will use the logic model, and what your program entails. The logic model shows that if your program has certain inputs or resources, then it can carry out specific activities. If your program carries out these activities, then it can produce these outputs. If your program has produced these outputs, then it will achieve these outcomes. Starting on the far left side of the logic model is a column for inputs, also called resources. Inputs are the resources that are essential for the program's activities to occur. They may include a combination of human, financial, organizational, and community-based resources that are available to a program and used to carry out a program's activities. For example, inputs or resources for a nutritional assistance program might include funding, like AmeriCorps grant or community-based grant, program staff and AmeriCorps members, community volunteers, research on nutrition, and food resources available for purchase or distribution. The activities could include outreach to let families know about the program, assessment of families' level of food insecurity or need for nutrition assistance, Meals on Wheels type food assistance delivered by AmeriCorps members to low-income families, referrals to food shelves or other nutrition assistance support. Outputs could include number of families served, number of meals provided, number of referrals made, number of trips to food shelves completed. Outcomes could include short-term, 95% of families served experience immediate relief of hunger. In the medium term, it may be families experience a reduction in food insecurity. In the long term, families have better physical health because of better nutrition. I'd like to show you how to read a logic model. Logic models are typically read from the left to the right, employing an if-then sequence among the key components. It reads, if your program has these inputs or resources, then it can carry out these activities. If your program carries out these activities, then it can produce these outputs. If your program has these outputs, then you will achieve these outcomes. In addition, a logic model has two sides. The process side, focusing on the program's implementation or its planned work, inputs, resources, activities, and outputs. The outcomes side of the logic model describes the expected sequence of changes that the program is to accomplish, which can be short-term, medium-term, and/or long-term changes. The outcomes side reflects what difference the program intends to make. You might be interested in answering the question, was the program implemented as planned? And if not, how and why was it altered for implementation? These questions concern the key components on the left side of the logic model, the process side, so that the type of evaluation needed to answer these questions would be called a process evaluation, as opposed to an outcome evaluation. Let's review the learning objectives. The definition and importance of program alignment. Program alignment means that you effectively identify community needs and ensure that all aspects of your program align to directly address those needs. How to accurately identify and quantify the scope and nature of the community problem you are tackling. The first step is to identify the community problem by looking at what's happening right now within that community. How to make sure your resources, objectives, and services are aligned to address the need or problem you've defined. Once you have quantified the nature and scope of the problem, you need to determine or identify the resources you have available to address that problem. Whether you are designing a new program or selecting services, you should take the time to ensure that your planned services are the ones that directly address the defined needs of your problem statement and whether or not these services are likely to help you achieve your objectives. What theory of change and logic models are, and how they can help to ensure that all the aspects of your program align to effectively address the need or problem you have defined. The theory of change is that high-level view for how your project activities can address or solve a stated problem or need, and the logic model is the roadmap that illustrates your theory of change and shows how your intervention will create the change you are looking to see. To summarize the key points of this module, program alignment, the process of ensuring that all aspects of your program, resources, objectives, and services, which are the interventions, address the specific community needs that you have identified and will result in the outcomes you want to achieve. Problem is the negative condition that exists in the service area proposed, while the need explains the scope, significance, and cause of the problem. Output and outcomes. These are the intending number to serve and the identified short-term change you hope to see. Service intervention, a set of activities that will produce the intended outcome, supported by evidence. Evidence. The level of evidence in support of the intervention increases the likelihood of cause and effect relationship in your program. For assessment, we talk about outputs. An output tabulates, calculates, or records the actual products or services delivered by a program. Outcome. What changes the results of the service provided or product developed? Theory of change. High-level view of identifying the pathway linking your service activities to your intended outcome. The three elements of theory of change, community problem need, intervention, intended outcome, are all supported by data and evidence. Logic models play a critical role for creating an aligned program design. Be sure to reflect on these questions.